Well, good morning all. I'd like to welcome you to the ISO 37001-2016 Systemic Approach to Prevention, Detection, and Management of Bribery webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the ABMS Program Manager and also a member of the Executive Committee for the 37001 standard for PJR. Couple of notes for everyone. All of our participants today are on mute, but we absolutely would like to take your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will address questions at the conclusion of the presentation. One of the more common questions we get is whether or not the presentation will be available for download or review. This is the first presentation of this particular webinar, but we will be making it available shortly after we're finished. The slides will be available for download from our website at pjr.com. And in a couple of days, the webinar will also be posted on our YouTube page if you would like to review it with voiceover. Our topics for today, we're going to have a discussion on what the 37001 standard is and how it was developed. We'll review the 37001 standard's definition of bribery. We'll talk a little bit about why an anti-bribery management standard was developed. We will discuss the impact of the Annex SL document on the development of this standard. We'll go over the three key provisions within 37001. These are prevention, detection, and response. We'll discuss a little bit of the benefits of getting 37001 certified, and then a few concluding remarks and your questions. So 37001 is the first ISO published standard written for the topic of bribery. Its full title is Anti-Bribery Management Systems, Requirements with Guidance for Use. Now it addresses the topic of bribery, obviously, and it presents a definition for bribery, but it acknowledges that the term bribery has different legal definitions depending on the local laws, the local statutes. This is a general definition taking into account some of those very basic ideas. So the official definition of bribery as defined in Section 3 is as follows. It is the offering, promising, giving, accepting, or soliciting of an undue advantage of any value. This could be financial or non-financial, directly or indirectly, and irrespective of location, in violation of applicable law, as an inducement or reward for a person acting or refraining from acting in relation to the performance of that person's duties. That encompasses a number of different bits of verbiage from American law and other international law. It covers, the aspects of financial and non-financial and so forth. So there's a lot that's encompassed in that definition. So why an anti-bribery management standard? Well, bribery is an ugly practice, and it is still prevalent in certain industries. We certainly see it in certain regions. If an organization is suspected of involvement in bribery, it can affect their ability to even be considered to bid on future business. So if we don't have trust in an organization, we're not going to do business with them, obviously. So if we have a mutually respected standard to combat bribery, the organization has a fighting chance to shake its reputation and to bid on business. Now, the efforts that relate to anti-bribery go back many years, and the ISO 37001 developers all point to the Federal Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, back in 1977. There are aspects of that act that made their way into the 37001 standard. Now, more recently, the founding of the organization Transparency International back in 1993. That's a key part of the scheme. They publish what's called a corruption perception index. This is used prominently in determining audit time. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, of course, of 2002. The UK Anti-Bribery Act, similar aspect in 2010. And then actually, BSI published a standard, 10,500, back in 2011. And again, portions of that standard, aspects of that standard ultimately formed what we now have as the 37,001 2016 standard. Now, like any other ISO published standard, the ISO 37001 was developed by an assigned committee. In this case, it was Project Committee 278. And the work on the standard took roughly 2.5 years. They began in the winter of 2014 and issued a committee draft that fall. About a year later, we saw the draft international standard. A year after that, we had a final draft standard. And shortly after that, the official ISO publication was released. Its date of publication was October 13th, 2016. Now, like every other ISO published standard from the past 7 years, ISO 37001 is rooted in Annex SL. Now, if you've been on any of our other webinars, you're probably already familiar with Annex SL. It is a special set of requirements that was first published back in 2012 from the Joint Technical Coordination Group. And what Annex SL provides is a 10-section blueprint for writing the ISO family of standards. Now, as to why that is important, any organization that has implemented an Annex SL rooted standard within the last 4 to 5 years can add ISO 37001 to their certification portfolio with relative ease. So this means, for example, if you're already ISO 9001 2015 certified, the sections and requirements from ISO 37001 are going to look very familiar to you. And you go right down the list. That's the same for ISO 14001 or 45001 and so forth. Now, some of these obviously are not published by the ISO, but they follow the Annex SL format. So, for example, if you are in the automotive industry and you have an IATF 16949 system in place, again, it's that same 10-section format, and you can add 37001 very easily. Now, obviously, ISO 37001 can be pursued as a standalone certification, but the majority of the companies that we're seeing are viewing it as something that they can add to their certification portfolio. So again, if you are already ISO 9001 or ISO 14001, etc., certified, there's already a lot of familiar content in the ISO 37001 standard. Things like management review and the requirements for an internal audit, corrective action, competency. These are all things that are rooted really in that Annex SL document. And so they show up in the 37001 standard. If you already have existing programs for those requirements, you can absolutely continue to utilize them in implementing an ISO 37001 ABMS. So how does an anti-bribery management system work? ISO 37001, in how it's written, it provides 3 key focus areas, and these can be understood as prevention of bribery incidents, detection of bribery incidents, and then response to bribery incidents. So the bulk of the requirements that were written into the 37001 standard focus on prevention. Obviously, that is the ideal state. We want to be in a place where there is no bribery activity, and we want to focus on prevention. So what are some of the requirements that 37001 has? Well, probably the most direct of these is found in section 4.5, and it's called bribery risk assessments. Now, these are supposed to be performed on a regular basis, and of course, regular is subjective, and serve as a means to evaluate current and potential bribery risk. And these do come with a record requirement. Secondly, there is a requirement for an anti-bribery policy. Now, some of you on the call, if you have a background in ISO 9001, I'm sure you remember quality policy. Well, this is a similar idea. This is a required statement. It has to be issued by the management of the organization, and it's intended to make sure that the organization's stance on bribery, their view of bribery, is made clear to the organization, and also obviously to try to raise awareness that there is an ABMS program in place. The prevention controls continue in section 5.3.2 with the anti-bribery compliance function. Now, this is a mandatory party. It's usually a group of people that are tasked with multiple responsibilities relative to the ABMS. So this is going to include deployment of the system, development of the system, and effectiveness reporting. Now, this function, it has to be staffed with parties that are both empowered and independent. We can't just assign it to someone who has no authority. That's not allowed. And again, this is usually a group of people. So again, to kind of correlate this to a 9001 environment, if you think about how we used to have a group called, or a party called rather, the management representative. This is a similar idea, but again, the way it's written in the 37001 standard, it's usually going to be fulfilled by a team representing various disciplines within the organization, so that collectively all of the authority is there and all of the empowerment is there. Okay. Another prevention control comes in section 7.2 under employment awareness and training. Now, this is actually one of the more extensive and prescriptive of the requirements within 37001. They have a long list of things that you have to do relative to what we would probably term as HR. There are requirements pertaining to hiring, whistleblower protection, performance bonuses, performance incentives. It's mandatory that you provide bribery training, and so forth. Long list of requirements in section 7.2. They really want a system of awareness. Getting into section 8, there's a number of requirements in section 8. Due diligence is covered in section 8.2. And it's directly related to the risk assessments that are mentioned in section 4.5. And what it says is that you need to perform appropriate investigations for pending transactions and projects, etc., if a bribery risk is identified. So again, this is not something that you're doing after the fact. This is something that you're doing ahead of time. There's guidance on what they mean by due diligence in Annex A. There's a whole list of what that might encompass. In 8.3 and 8.4, we have financial and non-financial controls. And again, there's a lot of guidance on this provided in Annex A, and covers a myriad of potential controls. Could include things like tiered payment rights. In other words, one group might have certain purchase authority up to a certain dollar amount. and then anything above that requires secondary approval, something along those lines. Separation of duties. Maybe one party is responsible for approving an external provider, but another party is the one that's empowered to actually execute a purchase. Cash use restrictions, having dual sign-offs on contractual documents, restriction on accessing tenders or other price-sensitive information. So, I mean, there's a wide range of things that you could do. And again, these are spelled out in Annex A. The emphasis, though, is that you've put your program together relative to what your business is, relative to what you're doing. Prevention controls continue with Section 8.5, where there is discussion of controlled organizations and business associates. The idea is that you are going to flow down your controls to these external providers. Now, controlled organizations gets a bit of clarity in the note. It says that is an organization if you directly or indirectly control the management of the organization. So if it's a satellite office or something along those lines, that would fall under a controlled organization. Gifts, hospitality, and donations are covered in 8.7. This is a fairly self-explanatory requirement. Again, we look to Annex A for some guidance on this. And interestingly, Annex A says that these items are not expressly forbidden, but they have to be monitored and controlled. And you have to consider the context in which the item is given. That's another key aspect of this. In terms of detection controls, getting beyond preventing and actually detecting, there's only a couple of areas where detection is expressly covered. First and most obviously, the bribery risk assessments and the anti-bribery compliance function, both of which we've already reviewed. These are obviously viewed as both prevention and detection. The most direct section for detection is going to be Section 8.9, where it talks about raising concerns. And the primary thing that they are covering here is that personnel within your organization need to feel both empowered and unafraid to come forward and report actual or perceived incidents of bribery. So they talk about a variety of things. Mandatory anonymity for whistleblowers, treating reports in a confidential manner, protections against retaliation for whistleblowers, and so forth. So again, 8.9 covers the primary areas of detection. As far as response is concerned, for this we look primarily to Section 8.10. 8.10 is called Investigating and Dealing with Bribery. And there's a number of requirements here that pertain to response protocol. Among other mandates, it requires full cooperation with those tasked with the incident's investigation and the empowerment of the investigators. Once they've completed their investigation, they're supposed to share the results with the anti-bribery compliance function, and the results have to be treated in a confidential manner. Annex A, again, provides a lot of guidance on what that process might consist of and how you might structure your investigation and resolution arm. An aspect of ISO 37001 that makes it a bit unique in the new era of Annex SL rooted ISO standards is that it actually has a number of required procedures. I've provided 2 slides where we can cover the full list here. Employment, as I mentioned, that's a very extensive requirement, and it does have a mandatory procedure. Anti-bribery awareness is covered in Section 7.3. control of controlled organizations and business associates, and control of business associates not controlled. 851 and 852, both of these require procedures. That can be treated as a joint procedure, actually. Commitments by business associates not controlled by the organization, 8.6. Gift, hospitality, and donation control, 8.7. Raising concerns and reporting bribery, 8.9. Response protocol, 8.10. And then the internal audit requirement in 9.2.3. Now, just a reminder, the official definition of procedure taken from ISO 9000:2015 states a specified way to carry out an activity or process. The expected interpretation of this requirement is that the procedure will be documented, at least within an ABMS. Now, I've made several references already to the Annex A. Annex A is probably, by the numbers, the most helpful part of the standard for anyone that's implementing it. It is very helpful in explaining all of the really ABMS specific requirements. So again, due diligence, financial controls, non-financial controls, they're all given a thorough explanation in Annex A. And examples even are provided for organizations that are trying to decide what's going to be best for them to meet one requirement or another. So again, Annex A, very helpful if you're going to be implementing an ABMS. Now, as far as what we have put together to audit an ABMS program, we have a layered approach, and we are utilizing a variety of audit techniques. To begin with, there's going to be a lot of paperwork that we're going to be going through. We have to look at your procedures, obviously, but we're also going to be spending a good deal of time looking over contractual information, terms and conditions, and other related materials. Both terms and conditions established with your customers and also with your external providers. Your employees can expect to be interviewed. They'll be asked about their role in the organization, and we're going to expect that they have awareness of the anti-bribery management system and all of its various policies. The auditor is even going to conduct some online research. We're going to do some review on websites, on web filings. We're going to try to determine, has there been any mergers, any acquisitions, any accusations of bribery, anything that's been reported. All of that is done in advance of the audit. Again, it's a unique standard in terms of how we approach the audit process. In terms of benefits, we feel that there are numerous intangible and material benefits to getting ISO 37001 certified. Probably the most obvious of these is it gives assurance to outside stakeholders that you take business ethics seriously and you're working to promote a culture of honesty and trustworthiness. It gives you a means of selecting reliable partners in regions or industries with a reputation for bribery and corruption, whether that reputation is deserved or not. We feel that it can lead to overall cost reductions. It prevents conflict of interest, and it can be used as a resource for information in the event of an investigation of an alleged bribery incident. So if you are following the ABMS standard and find yourself in a court of law accused of bribery, you have resources at your disposal to provide information and resources on your behalf. So in conclusion, we feel that the 37001 standard is an intriguing new standard with the potential to really make a difference in the world of commerce. We do hope that you will use the points of this presentation to consider the benefits in pursuing ISO 37001 certification. And just a special note, as of this month, PJR is the only USA headquartered certification body to achieve A and AB accreditation for ISO 37001:2016. Would like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We have a presentation on the interaction of processes and how it impacts the audit process. We've got a separate presentation on exemptions within a quality management system, and we have webinars on a variety of other topics. We talk about stage 1 auditing. We have 2 special webinars on ISO 9001 and webinars on a variety of other standards. If you'd like to keep in touch with us, the best way for you to do that is to opt in for updates. If you go to our website at www.pjr.com, if you go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address, and click subscribe, you will be automatically opted in for future updates of interest. I do thank you for your time and attention, and I will be glad to address any questions that anyone has at this time. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Have a great holiday.